Welcome to the third part of Chapter 5 of our series, trying to answer the question, are we heading to a dystopian future? In this part, we will pick up where we left off in our exploration of the societal and socio-political characteristics of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. If you haven't seen or heard parts 1 and 2, you might want to go back and check them out. Also, this would be a perfect time to give this a thumbs up and maybe share it with someone, or even use the links in the description to buy the book off Amazon or Audible and support my work in other ways too. And now, let's continue where we left off. Characteristic number 6. Religion. Just like in PKD's own life, religion, or spirituality, plays a central role in the plot and the characters' lives. The religion in PKD's post-apocalyptic world is called Mercerism, named after Wilbur Mercer, the founder and central figure of this belief system. Mercerism is centered around empathy, caring for life, fairness, struggle, and of course, killing the bad guys, because you know how religions are. I guess this was PKD's take on Christianity, with the killing bit attributed to the institutional part of religion of which he was no fan. And don't worry, I'll get to the killing bit soon enough, being the good atheist that I am. Anyhow, the way Mercerism is practiced, like most things in this world, is sort of fake. I mean, in our world, people practice religion by following the rules and occasionally participating in some kind of communal prayer. Mercerism is practiced in very much the same way, only the communal gathering and even the mystic revelation it brings about are electronically induced, or at least experienced. The way followers of Mercerism, called Mercerites, practice their religion is through a gadget called an empathy box. Holding the empathy box handles, their minds are merged into a collective consciousness embodied in the figure of Mercer. During this mind fusion, Mercerites share each other's thoughts and feelings and experience together Mercer's torment as he strenuously climbs up a hill in what sounds like a Sisyphean endeavor, since every time he reaches the top, the journey begins again. And very importantly, PKD tells us that, and I quote, "An android, no matter how gifted as to pure intellectual capacity, could make no sense out of the fusion which took place routinely among the followers of Mercerism." Make mental note of this fact for later when I explore mass entertainment. But for now, let's dive into the figure of Wilbur Mercer. Mercer himself is sort of a Christ-like figure. He is described as, and I quote, "an archetypical entity from the stars, superimposed on our culture by a cosmic template," which to me sounds even more inexplicable than Jordan Peterson's Bible ramblings. But if that description is not weird enough for you, let me introduce you to Wilbur Mercer's origin story, which of course I will quote straight from the book. Once, he remembered, it had been different. Back before the curse had come, an earlier, happier part of life. They, his foster parents, Frank and Cora Mercer, had found him floating on an inflated rubber air rescue raft off the coast of New England. Or had it been Mexico, near the port of Tampico? He did not now remember the circumstances. Childhood had been nice. He had loved all life, especially the animals. Had in fact been able for a time to bring dead animals back as they had been. He lived with rabbits and bugs wherever it was, either on Earth or a colony world. Now he had forgotten that too. But he recalled the killers, because they had arrested him as a freak, more special than any of the other specials. And due to that, everything had changed. Local law prohibited the time reversal faculty by which the dead returned to life. They had spelled it out to him during his 16th year. He continued for another year to do it in secret, in the still remaining woods, but an old woman whom he had never seen or heard of had told. Without his parents' consent, they, the killers, had bombarded the unique module which had formed in his brain, had attacked it with radioactive cobalt, and this had plunged him into a different world, one whose existence he had never suspected. It had all been a pit of corpses and dead bones, and he had struggled for years to get up from it. The donkey, and especially the toad, the creatures most important to him, had vanished, had become extinct. Only rotting fragments, an eyeless head here, part of a hand there remained. At last, a bird which had come there to die told him where he was. He had sunk down into the tomb world. He could not get out until the bones strewn around him grew back into living creatures. He had become joined to the metabolism of other lives, and until they rose, he could not rise either. How long that part of the cycle had lasted, he did not know. Nothing had happened, generally, so it had been measureless. But at last, the bones had regained flesh. The empty eye pits had filled up, and the new eyes had seen. While meantime, the restored beaks and mouths had cackled, barked, and caterwauled. Possibly he had done it. Perhaps the extrasensory node of his brain had finally grown back. Or maybe he hadn't accomplished it. Very likely it could have been a natural process. Anyhow, he was no longer sinking. He had begun to ascend. End quote. In other words, Mercer's mythology depicts him as a miserable non-human human who's turned into a subhuman in a dystopian world with dead animals. A mythology that turns into a religion practiced in a dystopian world with dead animals inhabited by miserable humans, subhumans, and non-humans. But things get really tricky when you consider the context of the quote. It was written as if these were the memories of our chickenhead John Isidore, which brings us back to how this religion is practiced. The Sisyphean climb. As mentioned, to practice Mercerism, the practitioner holds two handles of an electronic gadget called an empathy box. Once connected, the practitioner's consciousness fuses with all other practitioners and with that of Mercer himself as he's struggling to climb up a hill in some alien world. The further up the slope Mercer gets, the more arduous the climb becomes. Later, at some point during the ascent, stones are thrown at Mercer from some unseen place by an unseen entity or entities. But notably, when the stones hit Mercer, anyone fused with Mercer at the time feels it and is physically injured in the real world. In other words, the fusion with Mercer is both metaphysical and physical. So physical, in fact, that some people, especially the elderly, occasionally die in the real world, something that happens more frequently the closer you get to the top of the hill where the torment is at its maximum. As a side point, it's worth mentioning that the most likely to die are those not lucky enough to live in the buildings that have a doctor standing by. I guess that's the future equivalent of not having health insurance. As mentioned during the fusion with Mercer, all Mercerites also merge consciousness with each other. This means they also share each other's feelings, both good and bad, and even hear each other's thoughts. To explain the experience, let me quote how the special John Isidore feels once fusion had begun. He had crossed over in the usual perplexing fashion. Physical merging, accompanied by mental and spiritual identification with Wilbur Mercer, had reoccurred, as it did for everyone who at this moment clutched the handles, either here on Earth or on one of the colony planets. He experienced them, the others, incorporated the bubble of their thoughts, heard in his own brain the noise of their many individual existences. They and he cared about one thing. This fusion of their mentalities oriented their attention on the hill, the climb, the need to ascend. End quote. By the way, it is essential to note that Mercer is not a replacement for God. In fact, God is invoked when people struggle during their collective suffering. To quote again from John Isidore's session, "God," he thought in weariness, "in what way is this fair? Why am I up here alone like this, being tormented by something I can't even see?" And then, within him, the mutual babble of everyone else in fusion broke the illusion of aloneness. End quote. The way this quote ends is a great segue to the next point. What motivates Mercerites? In the quote I gave, John Isidore says quite plainly that Mercerism is a cure for loneliness. In other words, it's an escape from the harshness of the individual's struggle into the comforting embrace of collective resolve. But there's a catch. And again, allow me to quote from the book, this time from the part when Rick Deckard gets back home with a brand new expensive goat. When Erin learns of the new goat, she tells him, "Let's run downstairs and give thanks to Mercer." Rick, however, isn't keen on the idea, to which Erin answers the following, and please pay close attention to Rick's reaction at the end. "I want to transmit the mood you're in now to everyone else. You owe it to them. It would be immoral to keep it for ourselves. Once that happened to me. I fused and picked up someone who had just acquired an animal. And then one day I found myself receiving from someone whose animal had died. But others of us shared our different joys with them, and that cheered the person up. We might even reach a potential suicide. What we have, what we're feeling might—" "They'll have our joy," Rick said, "but we'll lose. We'll exchange what we feel for what they feel. Our joy will be lost." End quote. Before we go on, allow me to sum up what I think PKD's two main assertions are up to this point. 1. The willingness of humans, as miserable as they might be, to sacrifice their mental well-being to improve that of others. This, again, emphasizes the difference between humans and androids. At the same time, Rick's reluctance is a nod to the unempathic android in us all. 2. Given PKD's own religiosity, I assume he's trying to preach the benefits of religion. In this case, not believing for belief's sake, but rather the communal rituals that remedy loneliness and act as emotional crutches in times of deep despair, while, at the same time, reminding us to be thankful for what we have. That said, I would like to digress here and point you to two contradictory yet complementary phrases from the Jewish Talmud. One says that the sorrow of the many is half consolation, meaning that knowing others suffer as much as you do is sort of comforting. However, the Talmud, being one long argument between rabbis, also states that the sorrow of the many is the consolation of fools. I assume where PKD and I differ is that I see the latter phrase as more accurate, while he probably sees the former as more important. But I don't know that for sure. Regardless, PKD also makes sure to remind us of the most essential comfort religion has to offer: the promise of immortality. To that end, let me quote John Isidore again. Because Wilbur Mercer is always renewed, he's eternal. At the top of the hill, he's struck down. He sinks into the tomb world, but then he rises inevitably, and us with him. So we're eternal too. End quote. To summarize the points up till now, my takeaway is that for most Mercerites, Mercerism is basically spiritual escapism. In a way, I guess that mirrors most religions in our own world. But where it gets interesting is not what is said, but what is left out. You see, the book hints that the empathy box is ubiquitous. In other words, compared to codpieces, mood organs, animals, and even TV sets, the empathy box is probably the most accessible source of comfort you can put your hands on. No pun intended. And what I'm left to wonder is, how? Who is financing it? Who developed it? Who is leading it? All these are unknowns. That said, given that according to the book, the powers that essentially control the world, the UN, USA, and Soviet Russia, all endorse Mercerism, PKD might be hinting to us that Mercerism is sponsored or maybe even created by the ruling class, perhaps as a means to pacify the population. This will become more apparent when I get to the struggle between mass entertainment and Mercerism, which we will get to soon enough. But before getting to mass entertainment, let me explore the less pleasant aspects of Mercerism. Killing the killers. In Mercerism, murder is strictly prohibited. This, of course, shouldn't surprise you, as by now you know very well how much life is valued in this post-apocalyptic world. However, like in every good religion, killing is a no-no except when it's a yes, and allowed me to quote, "You shall kill only the killers," Mercer had told them the year empathy boxes first appeared on Earth. And in Mercerism, as it evolved into a full theology, the concept of the killers had grown insidiously. In Mercerism, an absolute evil plucked at the threadbare cloak of the tottering, ascending old man, but it was never clear who or what this evil presence was. A Mercerite sensed evil without understanding it. Put another way, a Mercerite was free to locate the nebulous presence of the killers wherever he saw fit. End quote. This, mind you, is one of the justifications Rick uses when contemplating the morality of killing or retiring androids. This now makes the unknown origins of this religion even more suspicious. Mercerism now seems to be a means to distract and pacify the population while providing a path to justify what might be considered immoral. Now, I might be a bit more cynical than many other people, but you must admit this sounds like the perfect tool of control. Still not sure? Well, let me quote an exchange between Rick and Wilbur Mercer during Fusion, just as Rick is having second thoughts about going off to finish the last 3 Nexus 6 androids. A landscape of weeds confronted him, a desolation. The air smelled of harsh blossoms. This was the desert, and there was no rain. A man stood before him, a sorrowful light in his weary, pain-drenched eyes. "Mercer," Rick said. "I'm your friend," the old man said, "but you must go on as if I did not exist. Can you understand that?" He spread empty hands. "No," Rick said. "I can't understand that. I need help." "How can I save you," the old man said, "if I can't save myself?" He smiled. "Don't you see? There is no salvation." "Then what's this for?" Rick demanded. "What are you for?" "To show you," Wilbur Mercer said, "that you aren't alone. I am here with you and always will be. Go and do your task, even though you know it's wrong." "Why?" Rick said. "Why should I do it? I'll quit my job and emigrate." The old man said, "You will be required to do wrong no matter where you are. It is the basic condition of life to be required to violate your own identity. At some time, every creature which lives must do so. It is the ultimate shadow, the defeat of creation. This is the curse at work, the curse that feeds on all life, everywhere in the universe." End quote. If I didn't know any better, I would say that someone is trying to control Rick. Mercer pacifies Rick with solace and then tells him to betray himself to finish the job he does not want to finish. And it gets even worse in the next section, which deals with another means of control we know all too well from our own reality. So, at number 7 we have mass media. One of the book's most interesting aspects is its depiction of the artificiality, shallowness, and insidious nature of mass media, or more accurately, mass entertainment. And even better is how PKD connects it to the real and fake question. First, we are informed that only 2 media outlets are available in this post-apocalyptic world. The first is the government channel, which is only concerned with pushing people to Mars, or, put simply, pushing the agenda of the powers that be. The other is a never-ending talk show called Buster Friendly and His Friendly Friends, available on both TV and radio. Buster Friendly is the talk show's host name. Somehow, without anyone wondering how, he manages to do his show every day with no break for 23 hours straight. Why 23 and not the whole 24? Well, 1 hour is reserved for, and I quote, a religious sign-off, 10 minutes of silence, and then a religious sign-on. End quote. As the show's title suggests, beside Buster Friendly, the show also features his friendly friends. a set of repeating funny-ish guests, each being a type of caricature of some templated stereotypical figure. While Buster is portrayed as a TV comic, throughout the book we are made aware that he's preparing his vast interplanetary audience for some earth-shaking investigative work that he will air at night. And when I say vast audience, I mean vast. Like Trump capital letters vast. Oh, and when I say throughout the book, I mean PKD might have gone a bit overboard with that. It's like the book is a countdown to Buster's groundbreaking investigative news story. We'll get to that investigative piece of news soon enough. But before that, I must mention that Buster seems to have some kind of insidious motive, especially when it comes to Mercerism. So let's deal with that for a bit. Mass entertainments fight against mass religion. For some reason, it seems Buster Friendly is trying to drive people away from Mercerism, making fun of it and its followers. This leads our special John Isidore to ponder the following. Why did Buster Friendly always chip away at Mercerism? No one else seemed bothered by it. Even the UN approved, and the American and Soviet police had publicly stated that Mercerism reduced crime by making citizens more concerned about the plight of their neighbors. Mankind needs more empathy. Titus Kroning, the UN Secretary General, had declared several times. Maybe Buster is jealous, Isidore conjectured. Sure, that would explain it. He and Wilbur Mercer are in competition. But for what? Our minds, Isidore decided. They're fighting for control of our psychic selves. The empathy box on one hand, Buster's gaffes and off-the-cuff jibes on the other. End quote. But this fight over the public psyche escalates once we learn that Buster's much-anticipated exposé is a rigorous, empirical, investigative refutation of Mercerism. It starts by exposing that the alien scenery in the background of Mercer's ascent is a painting. Not only that, but Mercer himself is, in fact, a drunk old actor. He was hired by some unknown employer to shoot a set of 15-minute videos where fake rubber stones are thrown at him, causing fake wounds with ketchup instead of blood. And a joke is made that the only suffering he went through was going an entire day without whiskey. And I guess you wouldn't be surprised that we are also informed that Buster is, well, an android. One in a series of androids, in fact. And hopefully, it wouldn't surprise you at this point that the last 3 escaped androids were watching this takedown of Mercerism with glee. Put simply, mass media / entertainment is even more fake than anything else in this world of imitations. And given that in the attention economy, mass media is in competition with religion, it does its best to expose it as fake, too. But this is where PKD puts things straight. Unlike, for instance, someone like Baudrillard and his ilk of merry postmodern pranksters. You see, the figurehead of mass entertainment is an android, a creature devoid of any kind of empathic abilities. But Mercerism, while empirically proven to be fake, is empathic by its very nature. And it is that which makes it real. You might ask yourself now, just how real can Mercerism be if it is proven beyond a doubt to be artificial? Well, near the end of the book, Mercer himself appears before the human Rick Deckard and saves his life by alerting him to an android who's sneaking up on him. At the same time, Mercer also appears before John Isidore and keeps him from harm's way. Thus, while Mercerism and Buster Friendly are both fake, it's Mercerism's empathic virtue that makes its manifestation an actuality. And given that Mercer helps Rick retire the androids, the machines that could never fuse with Mercer, PKD is finally telling us what separates the fake from the real. Empathic virtue is what makes something real. And as evidence, it triumphs in the real world over the artificial, unvirtuous androids who tried to destroy Mercerism and celebrated its destruction. And with that, I'll see you in the next and final part of Chapter 5, where we'll conclude our look at Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and try to ascertain what PKD is trying to warn us of and why. And remember, don't do to others what is hurtful to you, and don't let the bad guys win. And feel free to use the links below and support my work. And of course, thanks for staying to the end.